got another. I'm not.
It's going to be running a lot better.
Oh.
I'm going to get a GCS.
So, before I begin, I'd like to introduce a couple of my crew members. Austin and Ted, would you guys come in here, please? And Brad Eggeman. Yeah. And the rest of my staff is in Cheyenne, and they're on days off. But Austin and Ted have been with me from the beginning of this project, along with several of the other staff members that you'll see on our slide presentation here. And without their tremendous dedication to a project like this, long, hard days, a lot of physical effort. As you'll see when we start this presentation, this is a big project and a lot of hands-on hard work. And we knew that going into this, just like any steam locomotive effort. There's a reason why steam locomotives don't operate, other than for purposes like this. And this is entirely a public relations endeavor. It's not so we can say, well, we've got the world's biggest locomotive. Obviously that factors into the decision, But this is simply, when you look at what a locomotive does, a steam locomotive, any locomotive, and how it affects people, you can imagine what a big boy steam locomotive, and imagine when you see one operating, what that will be like. So Austin Barker here is our lead machinist. Ted Schulte's my fireman. Brad Eggeman just joined our crew as a diesel foreman. We also have E9, Centennial, and a couple of switch engines, and any number of diesel locomotives that we have with us when we travel. Brad brings with him nearly 40 years of railroad experience, and he started on the E9 fleet. And so he's no stranger to a 645 diesel engine, and that's what we have in the E9s, a Centennial, and our rotary snowplow. So we're really happy to have him aboard. So without any further ado, let me get started here. I am going to kind of whiz through these. Like I said, I've got 175 slides. A real big project. Let's begin. This is the day we all arrived at Pomona. That's my staff there. And we got out of the vehicles. Several of the guys had never seen a big boy before, other than driving by the 4004 in Cheyenne. So when you see a big boy locomotive sitting in a museum or sitting anywhere, you're struck by its sheer size. My good friend Ed Gerlitz was with us, so in memory of him, I wanted to include this slide right up front. Ed was my steam locomotive mentor for over 30 years, and he was with us out in California, and unfortunately he passed away during the last stage of our move across the parking lot. We dressed him up just like us, and he loved it. There was just few opportunities. The crew kind of grumbles a little bit when I say, all right, come on, you guys, gather around for a photograph. But we're glad we do that. And here's the result. And just one other quick point. Some of these photographs are credited to Steve Kreis and Dave Lustig. But most of these photographs are taken from my camera throughout this process. So let me just start at the top. We've got Ted Schulte on the left in the hard hat, Don Creer by the bell, and Kurt Clark. Don's a Boilermaker. Kurt is a fireman in training. Over on the far right, we have Brent Malota, a wonderful volunteer, along with Bruce Kirk. Down below in the green vest, we have Walt Lester. He's not a member of our crew, but he's got 439 combat missions at Vietnam, so I certainly said, yes, sir, come on up here. And he's an outstanding friend of the program, and he's a member of the Railway and Locomotive Historical Society. We've got Austin Barker and myself just below the headlight, Ed Gerlitz over here, and right above Ed is Paul Gershio of the Rail Giants Museum. And make note of this photograph. Once again, you can see some of the parts we've already gotten taken off of it. This is taken from the cupola of the caboose, right in front of the big boy. This is our compound once we're getting started. We're starting to disassemble the locomotive. In order to move a locomotive like this, it sat there in that museum longer than I've been alive. It was moved in 1989, and it had moved in that 52 years, but it didn't move very much. So we wanted to evaluate everything and make sure that it was going to be movable. It's not just a matter of moving something down the street or 50 or 60 miles. We're taking this locomotive 1,293 miles, and we are accountable to the Union Pacific Railroad. And we've got waivers with Washington in the Federal Railroad Administration, so everything has to be correct. So it's going to be a long process, as you'll see, disassembling all these components. This is an eccentric bearing on an eccentric crank and eccentric rod, and that's what it'll look like when we're done with it. So you can see, other than a little bit of handwork, the bearings are in good shape. This bearing happens to be commercially available, so we could replace it, and we have many of these in our inventory. But the rod itself is a little bit more difficult. That's one of the many floating bushings. And again, it's got a lot of miles on it. According to the records that I have, the locomotive traveled 41,000 miles from its last shopping. And there's a main rod. Now the differences between The Challengers, the 800s, and the big boys, the rods, the components, they look very similar. This is a 138-inch main rod. The 844 is 135. So this is just a little bit longer than the 844. A lot of meat left on that cross section, a lot of life left in that rod. When you look at the very front part, same thing. That fit up front is a dry fit, so the OD of the bearing doesn't move in the rod, or it's just allowed to move a little bit. So it's in very good condition. This is what we call a gear frame, and some needle bearings on the eccentric link. And those were disassembled and cleaned and reassembled there. And the eccentrics have to operate on the left side to drive the force feed lubricators. And as you'll see as we go on, we've rehabilitated those. So those are McGill needle bearings. And there is the eccentric and the link trunnions and the drive sprocket for the left front force feed lubricator. All ready to go back together. And here's a photograph of the left front crosshead. And as you'll see as we go along, when we move the locomotive, and I'll get more into detail on the process of moving it, it was the most practical way to move something like this when you've got a parking lot that's uneven, to use plywood. And we used that with great success. One of the big rod nuts had all, you can see the top left photograph, the bronze wear surface, the liner, was worn off. Well, that's not going to be acceptable, because now we've got that part of the nut will be rubbing on that part of the connecting rod, and that's going to eventually wear that rod excessively. So the way the equipment is designed to have a consumable wear surface that's welded on. So in our many trips back and forth to Pomona, this was one of the parts that was taken back to Cheyenne, and Austin TIG welded silicone bronze and machined it. So we took it back down with new silicone bronze on it, so now when the locomotive returns home to Cheyenne, it will have the proper wear surface. And there it is, assembled.